Hi and good morning. My name is Dan. I'm with UTD and I'm out in Naudive in Denmark. This week I'm starting out every day with a cup of coffee and a quick chat with you about a piece of reading material that I've dug out from the World Wide Web, and today we're going to be talking a little bit about the human-machine interfaces in an automated system. Now there are loads of different applications here, obviously in aviation, now in relation to cars, and of course in diving we also have some applications where this is relevant. So I dug out a report that I've been reading last night, quite a lengthy one that I'll be condensing on very heavily today. It's from the National Transportation Safety Board in America, where they've been looking at an accident where there was an automated driving system in a car that was being employed, and there was an accident, a terrible accident, and they looked at some of the findings that they could find in using automated systems to drive a vehicle. Now this is quite general stuff, so obviously we can't translate things directly from one sector into another. What might work in aviation might not necessarily in diving, and vice versa, and so on. But the general problem seems to be, the challenge rather, is that when we automate on a complicated system where something might go wrong, like one piece of the puzzle in this system might malfunction or do something that we weren't expecting or something that we didn't want, and an automated system is being used to work that, then we might, as humans, be the weak link. But even so, we still run into trouble if we don't have a full understanding and we aren't fully aware of the ins and outs and how things work in relation to each other, and being capable of finding out what the problem is, what the effects are, and what the best way to deal with it is in a timely fashion. That might be something that we'll be encountering regardless if it's aviation, if it's in cars, or in for instance rebreathers, right? So I thought this was a very interesting article or report to read, because it has an implication for us as well, of course. So I'm having a cup of coffee this morning to have a quick chat with you about what my views are on it. Now, what I think makes a world of sense in the world of rebreathers and what we do in UTD is running them manually. Now I'm not saying that's the holy grail or that's completely without any downsides at all. We do it for a myriad of reasons that is going to be a different discussion now. But the general issue that we must be aware of are the pros and the cons of doing things in various ways. So if we opt to use an automated system, then that's not the problem in and by itself. We must be aware of what the limitations are. We must understand what we're using it for, what it'll do and why, and we must have made up a pretty good idea of all this. We must be clear about this with ourselves, because if we don't do that, then we risk putting all of our trust into an automated system that might be working on completely different parameters or different on different logics than we are. That's usually the case with differences between humans and machines, right? So that's definitely something that I think is very interesting, and something that relates, of course, to diving, but also many other aspects of life, and probably in an increasing to an increasing degree as science and technology advances. So I think that's very interesting. Personally, for me, I don't feel the need to automate things very much compared to the next guy, you know. I don't really like to have an automated gear in my car. I prefer the manual, so that's purely sentimental. But that's one thing of it. If I do employ an automated gear, then I can sit down and I can look at it and I can go, all right, you know what, that makes a world of sense. Why would I use that? Yeah, okay, that does ring a bell with me, but I prefer it the other way for other reasons. Now, it's more difficult to start driving a car when you're using manual gear. But as you get used to it as you train towards it, as you spend time behind the wheel and learn how to drive, you'll get more confident with it over time, to a point where it's no longer really an active part of your consciousness. You're no longer spending any energy doing it. It becomes rote. It becomes fully integrated with your process of driving a car, and at this point it starts to make sense to have a manual, because it's no longer a manual. It's no longer really a task that you need to do. It doesn't fill anything in your mindscape. So at this point you get the control from it, but you don't really have as much of the downside of having to do things. You don't see it that way. It doesn't come across that way, and it doesn't take up a lot of your mind's capacity to deal with things to do so. But that, even so, there's still going to be a progression towards that time. You still need to work towards it. So if my only reason for using an automated gear or an automated anything was, well, it's easier, then I would risk I would run into this risk of at least kind of following it a little bit, where I'd be the tail on the dog rather than the other way around, right? Then we'd run into trouble. If we get used to running something manually and then decide, you know what, I think it makes perfect sense to use electronic instead for some things, then we can flick it on. That makes sense to me, perfect sense to me. But from there to saying that automation is better, I think there's a far cry of a difference. So I think that there might not be, I'm not going to stand here and say what the ultimate answer is. I'm not going to stand here and propagate or advocate anything specific, right, for you or even for me. But what I will say is there are pros and cons, and if we make the choice on reasons that we know what are, then we are really doing a lot to mitigate some of the risks of kind of just stepping back and letting the automated car drive us, because that is when the risks really start to kick in, and that will also apply in rebreathe, the diving, for instance. So I think that if we get to a point of capacity where it's no longer a pain in the butt to run a rebreather manually, then I think that it's not a problem to use automated mode anyway, because your backup is still going to be manual. So if it's a manual, you know, if it's like the whole world starts to come down around you and now you need to do something that you think is really suboptimal because it's really difficult and you're not really comfortable with it, for instance, then I think that's a problem. Because now when you're in a contingency situation, you're stuck with a plan B, if you will, that you're not really comfortable with. That is a problem. That is a risk, right? Well, that's how I see it in relating to my own diving. So when I'm looking at the rebreather question, for me, I'll want to be able to dive it very, very well manually, and then I can flick on, if I will, the electronic support system or automation system for a specific task or a specific period of time or whatever. That resonates very well with my way of thinking about it, because now I have a very specific job that it does automated for me. I don't run it that way all the time. So there's a difference there. So that explains how I think about the role of an automated system in a human-machine interface. I don't want to be a guest in this landscape of systematics. So yep, that was a quick touch up on my general idea of automated systems and humans using them on a very general note. I hope that you have some thoughts about this as well, and if you do, you're more than welcome to comment below. Follow my page on UTD Norway and see what I'm up to, and tomorrow I'll be back with another cup of coffee and a new subject, and that's going to be looking at what happens after the fact and some of the difficulties that we might be facing in figuring out causality behind certain events and certain outcomes, right? So when we look at an outcome, we start to dig back, then it becomes quite difficult sometimes to ascertain exactly or figure out exactly what started the the snowball rolling. Right, so I'll be talking about that, and I'll be looking at some reading material related to it. Right. Thanks very much for following, and I'm hoping you're having a good morning as well. Have a great day, and as always, safe diving.